What's up passengers, welcome back to another video, and today I played the game about a broke teenager as we work our way to travel across the fictional country of Petria in order to cross the border in search of a better life. Is this a story about my Hispanic gardener? No, this is Road 96, a procedurally generated masterpiece that takes place in the 1990s where your choices matter and also has some strange parallels to our current political climate. I'm immediately thrusted into the driver's seat of a car that I just stole, and I have a 14-year-old boy in the passenger seat, so I just hope we don't get pulled over because this is definitely a questionable setup. It turns out that the boy is named Alex and he's some type of super genius who develops his own games. So we end up pulling over and trying his new game called Furious Tanks, which was pretty fun. Alex later reveals to us that he's an orphan running away from home who lost his biological parents to a terrorist attack in 1986. Afterwards, we eventually drive some more until the car runs out of gas. After dropping Alex off, I end up walking to a trailer park where I might encounter a redneck or a meth head, but to my surprise, we're introduced to a second major character of the game named Zoe. And after seeing her for the first time, I think this is a sign to get yourself a progressive, liberal baddie. After saving her from some accusations of stealing by the manager of the trailer park, we end up sharing some small talk. Afterwards, I stole $45 from a shed after typing in a code I saw on a post-it note. Talk about shitty security. But me being $45 richer, I decided to treat myself to a trailer for the night. While getting my doctor recommended 8 hours of sleep, I'm woken up in the middle of the night. But instead of the authorities, it's simply just Zoe asking to hang out. So I immediately fold and decide to go with her. It ends up being pretty awkward because Zoe is socially distancing from me like we're still in the pandemic. I honestly thought that she would cuddle right next to me to keep warm, but it's still a cute moment nonetheless. She reveals her backstory and then I attempted to serenade her by using her trombone. Unfortunately, we get caught and get told to leave by the manager. But before we split ways, I proposed to her that we should leave together. However, she politely rejected my proposal, which gave me the same feeling as a girl putting you in the friend zone, but at least she gave me a souvenir to remember her by. After leaving the trailer park, I get picked up by a truck driver named John, who endangers me by sleeping behind the wheel. But overall, the trip is surprisingly very chill as he gives good advice on how to cross the border. He then tasks me to create a drink which supposedly helps him stay awake by allowing me to go in the back of the truck. While looking for the ingredients, I end up stealing $45 for myself. Afterwards, I end up making the drink and decide to take a quick sip for myself, which tasted weird, but filled up my entire energy bar, which was nice. I then decided to stick with John for a little while because he seemed like a chill dude. He eventually dropped me off at Road 96 where I'm expected to find the border myself. I eventually end up at a cave that's located behind a waterfall where I get some much needed rest and leave $20 under a rock for any future travelers. I eventually make it to the border where I sweet talk a guard and end up in some type of migrant encampment where I donate $10 to help another crosser. But I end up finding a peculiar door that supposedly leads to some underground tunnels, so I decided to pay $25 for a keycard to access it. I eventually ended up inside and it was giving very creepy vibes with the hazy fog in front of you, which added to the mystery of the tunnels. I encountered a family who were trapped in the tunnels and begging for food, but with nothing to give, I simply walk past them. I then encounter a hallway and a guard yelling at me to open the door. So I decided to run towards the only exit, which was beginning to close, but in the lick of time, I was finally able to escape the country. In the second episode, I take control of a 15-year-old girl with only $15 in her pocket, who also wants to cross the border. After walking on the side of the highway in what seemed like days, I encountered a police officer having some car trouble. It turns out that she has a flat tire, so me being the mechanic that I am, managed to replace her tire. Afterwards, it started to rain, so we end up under a tree where the cop begins talking about her adopted son. But she eventually drives off and I decided to hitchhike. I end up getting picked up by a couple that's most definitely in a healthy relationship.
People are looting, Jeff. What good will come of that?
Looting is reasonable when the system is so broken.
but I also encountered Zoe again, which was nice. After engaging in some small talk, I end up 1v1ing her in a game of Connect 4, where I get absolutely dominated like I was a white girl dating her first black man. Suddenly, we end up getting pulled over by the cops in question, but Zoe, being an absolute idiot, decided it was a good idea to talk back to the officer and it ended up getting dragged out of the vehicle. I was then presented with the option of either helping Zoe or staying in the car, but me, being the selfish person I am, decided to stay in the car. After leaving Zoe behind, I get dropped off outside a burger restaurant where I order myself a burger and a drink. Suddenly, two masked men enter the restaurant, but instead of asking for papers and proof of citizenship, they simply asked for money, which was quite a relief. But it turns out that these two robbers were kind of idiots, but I somehow got looped into becoming an accomplice to their criminal act by using a piggy bank to collect everyone's money. But after a woman screamed, I somehow was able to jump onto the robber, which caused them both to run away, and with only $9 in my pocket, I decided to walk along the road some more. Afterwards, I end up walking to some political rally where they're revealing a new oil pump, but I also took on a job of being a camera operator for a propaganda news network. Suddenly, during the Minister of Oil's speech, it gets interrupted by protesters from the opposition, where I managed to sneak some footage of police brutality, but I somehow got paid $50, which was nice. I ended up using the money on a payphone to call my girlfriend, where she proceeded to break up with me, so I hung up the phone and paid for a bus ride, because now that I'm over her, I can now find myself a new girl once I cross the border. During the bus ride, I encounter Alex, who was the boy we met in the first episode. I did a quick favor for him before the bus dropped me off at Road 96, where I found a cave and spray painted a message encouraging people to vote, before I got some much needed rest. Afterwards, I went to the same migrant encampment where I asked this lady to get smuggled across the border. She originally was going to charge $50, but using my elite charisma skills, I was able to persuade her to smuggle me for free. After bribing a guard, we can finally make it to the border wall, but before I was able to cross, I ended up getting shot by a government agent like I was a US citizen in Minnesota. I guess not everyone can receive a happy ending. After witnessing a tragic end to our character, we took control of a 17-year-old boy with $17 to our name. We start the episode in the back of a taxi, and this kind of reminds me of those weird taxi videos I used to watch on a certain website. I sure hope I won't be doing any strange favors to the driver as a form of payment.
What do you mean by that?
It turns out that this cab driver is really weird and creepy, as he has someone trapped in his trunk. But me not wanting to become another victim, managed to unlock the door and escape, which granted me the appropriately named cleverness ability. After nearly becoming a victim to a serial killer, I encounter a drunk man wandering the desert, so I decided to reject everything I learned about stranger danger in elementary school by initiating a conversation with him. It turns out his name is John, and he kept rambling about some mama bear and referred to himself as Papa Bear, so I'm not sure if he's extremely drunk or has some weird bear kink, but me not being the one to kink shame, he ends up challenging me to a race up a hill where I end up beating him, but he also challenged me to a game of soccer where I also ended up beating him, which must be pretty embarrassing because imagine getting beat by some random teenager you met on the side of the road. Despite this, he ends up opening up about his personal life and gives me good life advice, but me not wanting to take advice from a man going through a midlife crisis, I decided to leave him as he stared at the stars and moon. I eventually end up paying $7 for a bus ride where I noticed that there is a cop on board transporting a prisoner, and I guess this whole defund the police thing must have gone a little too far, because why is a cop using public transportation to transport a prisoner when they typically have their own vehicles? After making conversation with the prisoner and officer, things got a little heated on the bus, and I was somehow expected to defuse the whole situation, but things escalated quickly when the officer proceeded to pull out her gun like she was an untrained immigration agent. Luckily, no one ended up getting hurt, and she proceeded to get off the bus. The bus eventually dropped me off at a gas station, and I noticed that Zoe had been cuffed to a police van and requested me to break her out. Me being reluctant to do so at first, ended up folding and agreeing to help her. After walking around the gas station, I end up picking up a telephone key which allowed me to tamper with the communication tower and cause the police to investigate the situation. With the cops distracted, I proceeded to pick up the keys and free Zoe, but unfortunately, we end up both getting caught and get put in the back of a police van. Suddenly, the van ends up getting ambushed as we're freed by a group of rebels called the Black Brigade, which is what I imagine being a high value member of the cartel must be like. We both end up going our separate ways as I continue to walk alongside the highway. I eventually end up at an abandoned house that also seems to double as a hideout for an idiot criminal duo named Stan and Mitch, but I end up getting caught and tied up. It turns out that aside from being criminals, Stan and Mitch are also somewhat of detectives themselves because they're investigating the potential assassination of a news reporter named Sonia Sanchez. After doing some detective work like I was Batman, I was able to conclude that Sonia Sanchez's planned assassination date was September 9th. So the pair of robbers end up setting me free and giving my money back. After getting some rest in a tiny cardboard hut, I end up hitchhiking and get picked up by a 14-year-old boy named Alex, and I feel very unsafe as he's definitely too young to drive as he can't even reach the pedals. It turns out that the kid has a very shaky relationship with his mother due to him being adopted, but I end up doing a favor for the kid by helping his mother, who works as a police officer, and tell him to repair his relationship with his mom. The kid eventually drops me off at Road 96 while I end up ziplining on some rusty pipes and nearly fall to my death, but luckily there was a body of water to help break my fall. I end up in the same cave and spray paint some more messages encouraging people to vote and get some much needed rest. Afterward, I end up at the border where I somehow register myself to take some offshore workers exam, which turned out to be extremely easy as long as you absolutely glaze the country of Petria. As a result, I was able to escape the country. The fourth episode begins when I choose to be an 18-year-old with only $10 in my pocket. I begin the episode as a passenger in John's truck, and he asks me for advice on how to ask out this girl he likes that he refers to as Mama Bear, and I somehow successfully managed to pass him the lob despite my lack of experience. But we get interrupted when robbers begin shooting at our truck, so I'm tasked with arming myself with a nail gun as I end up shooting the robbers. But we ended up dealing with the situation of the robbers as John proceeded to drop me off at some type of festival. To my surprise, I was able to sneak myself in by entering with the reporter Sonia Sanchez, who referred to me as her girlfriend, which was weird, but luckily my character was 18, so at least I didn't have to call the cops on her and put her on a registry. I end up exploring the festival, which turns out to be a campaign fundraising event for the current president of Petria named Tyrak. I then end up beating this dude in a game of air hockey and engage in some casual gambling while underage. But surprisingly, I walk away from the game $95 richer, which just goes to prove you that you should never stop gambling because 99% of gamblers quit before they hit it big. I eventually end up leaving the festival and decide to hitchhike. I end up getting picked up by the criminal duo Stan and Mitch while I get placed in the sidecar of their motorcycle. We end up exchanging some words before we're interrupted by a speeding taxi that we need to chase down because they believe the driver's behind the potential assassination of Sonia Sanchez. After dodging incoming traffic, we end up catching up to the driver, but they end up letting him go because they're absolute idiots. But they eventually drop me off at Row 96, while I'm finally reunited with Zoe. We end up walking to the same cave together, where we build a campfire and end up sleeping next to each other, which was nice. When I woke up, I realized she was gone and left a note, which reminds me of how my ex-girlfriend broke up with me. I eventually end up escaping the cave, and it seems like Zoe didn't make it too far due to her stuff getting confiscated. We then make it to her tent where we rest some more as we prepare to cross the border. After waking up, we run through the border, but I end up getting shot, so I beg Zoe to come and save me, and to my surprise, she actually does, which allowed me to escape the country while leaving Zoe to die. The fifth episode begins after we decide to play as a 16-year-old with $12 in our pocket. We begin our run in a stolen vehicle where I find driver registration papers in the glove box, which would help me later. I realized that it was an open road, so I decided to start speeding, but we ended up getting pulled over by the police. But this moment made me very lucky to not be black, or else the situation would have ended up very differently. So I gave my license and registration, which had the name Bartholomew Vanderbilt, and made the officer immediately suspicious. Luckily, I get saved from potentially being arrested when the cop falls victim to a drive-by, which results in me going after the criminals while the officer decides to ride shotgun. We eventually end up catching up with the suspects by flipping their car over. Afterwards, the officer ends up leaving but also drops her government pass, which will help me later as I continue to drive until the car runs out of gas. I then end up at a roadside bar where I finesse my way inside by asking to go to the bathroom, which is definitely a strategy that I might implement in real life if I want to get in anywhere for free. But I end up getting dragged into a very competitive game of air hockey and end up winning $15. I also engage in some underage drinking where I end up passing out like I was a Bill Cosby victim.
What did he say?
But I end up waking up in a room with a grown man telling me he wants to show me something big, which made me extremely concerned because that was the same thing my high school gym teacher told me when I was left alone with him. But it turns out he wasn't a pervert and just wanted to show me his secret underground hideout where the Black Brigades hang out, which leads me to eavesdrop on a meeting they're conducting where they're voting over whether or not they should be more aggressive in their tactics, but it ended up being a tie. But me playing the role of the tiebreaker, I decided to vote for non-violence, like my name was Mahatma Gandhi. After the meeting, I end up stealing a car with keys I found earlier and continue my journey. During my drive, my car gets hijacked by robbers who proceed to shove a shotgun to my face and quiz me on what it's like to be a criminal. But me, being the person who's never committed a single crime in their life, end up failing the quiz, and I end up losing all my money and vehicle. I've now officially hit a new low, which is worse than the time my girlfriend left me for another man by being broke and alone. I eventually make it to the cave where I spray paint some more motivational messages telling people to vote and get some much needed rest. Afterwards, I make it to the border and flash my government pass to forcefully register myself for the offshore workers exam, which made me feel like a VIP, and to no one's surprise, I ended up passing, which allowed me to escape the country once again. The final episode begins after we choose to play as an 18-year-old with $17 in our pocket. We begin our run outside a diner where I end up finding a credit card on the bathroom floor, and instead of trying to find the owner, I hit up the nearest ATM and withdraw $60. So I guess there is a positive reward for stealing. Then, I run into Alex again, where I absolutely beat him in a game of Pong and donated $10 to a political campaign, which will most likely be used to assist a foreign country. We eventually engage in some casual theft where I steal some money and car keys, which helped aid in my escape. I then end up outside a bar to get some much needed rest and was able to successfully beg for food. Once I got inside, it turns out the bar was extremely understaffed and decided to pick up a shift as a bartender and earn some decent money through tips. After some hard work, I decided to use my earnings to treat myself to a $7 bus ride to continue the journey. The bus eventually drops me off outside a cab depot, which looks like it's being cased by some robbers. I end up getting roped into the scheme, who forced me to be a lookout by watching them on the security cameras for potential intruders. The authorities are eventually alerted, but I barely manage to escape by climbing and crawling through the vent, while I steal a car after picking up some keys I found earlier. Afterwards, I end up picking up Sonia Sanchez on the side of the road after she crashed the limo. I guess this is one good example of why Muslim countries don't allow women to drive. But I eventually end up dropping her off at a phone booth where she could call for help. Then, I managed to drive myself to Road 96 where I make it to the cave, spray paint more motivational messages telling people to vote, and leave $40 for future travelers. However, when I attempted to leave the cave, I ended up getting caught by authorities and get placed in a holding cell. I guess this game really does depict the real-life experiences of illegal immigrants. Suddenly, chaos ensues as the border is under attack from protesters, so I'm transferred to a van and in the process of being transported out. But the van ends up flipping over, which provides the chance for me to escape. After defusing a bomb that was planted at the border wall, I was presented with the tough decision to either escape or join the fight. I ended up choosing to escape as I was only there for one purpose, but to my surprise, I ended up getting a happy ending where the authoritarian leader Tyrak is arrested and Flores wins the election, ensuring a smooth transition of power and stability for the country. Overall, Road 96 is probably one of the best games I've played recently and is surprisingly relevant considering that it only came out in 2021. Well, that's gonna be the end of this video. If you enjoyed, please don't forget to like and subscribe for more content just like this, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.